welcome to Daily Debrief from People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya and today we talk about US President Joe Biden's upcoming visit to Saudi Arabia. There's a growing risk of unrest in Brazil as it heads for presidential polls. And in sports, the Blatter Platini trial ends in an acquittal for both. US President Joe Biden's visit to the Middle East is scheduled to take place next week between July 13 and 16. The visit comes amid concerns over rising prices and dwindling supplies of fuel due to sanctions against Russia by the US and its allies. The US has been critical of Saudi's human rights record. The visit is significant in light of Biden's push for other countries in the Middle East to normalize their relations with Israel. Abdul from People's Dispatch is here with us to discuss the July 13 visit. Abdul, what is the significance of this visit of Biden's?
Well, there is nothing great to talk about. There are usual issues. He's visiting Israel and he's visiting Saudi Arabia, where there are common issues, for example, the war in Ukraine and the regional approach, US regional issues like the dominance of or the expected threats from the Iranians. These are the common issues which they will discuss. Apart from that, there will be specific discussions with Israel and with Saudi Arabia. One of the major discussions will be about US push towards making Israel more acceptable in the region, what we call the Abraham Accords, which started during Trump administration. This will continue with this visit also. Particularly when Biden is going to visit Saudi Arabia, he will try to persuade Saudis to normalize, quote unquote, normalize their relationship with Israel as they were able to do with UAE and other countries in the region. There will also be discussions about as I said before, what will be the approach of Israel and Saudi Arabia vis-a-vis Iran, because that is one major perceived threat for all three of them. Saudi Arabia and Israel are the closest allies of United States in the region, and Iran is considered to be a common threat to all of them. So all these issues will be discussed and debated. Apart, the most significant issue, which was basically should be on the agenda, is the Saudi U.S. attempt to encourage Saudis to produce more oil. We'll discuss that in a while, but before that, U.S. is also trying to, particularly Biden, given the Biden's record of being a kind of a president or a politician in U.S. who has always been pro-Israel and has been oversensitive towards Israel security, that will be the major issue. If you follow the Israeli press, they're talking about how Biden is going to visit different defense installations, and he is also going to visit some of the major weapons producers within Israel. He will also visit occupied territories, and that is we don't know whether this will lead to any significant development on the Israel-Palestine issue, but this will be a restoration of some kind of formal relationship which was broken during Donald Trump's reign.
Right. You know, one of the things that some of the press is noting is that they're talking about everything except oil in the run-up to this visit in the United States, Biden specifically. So what really is the visit about becomes a big question.
Well, I think that is the most significant agenda, but they are not ready to talk about it. Why it is most significant? Because we know that the prices of petrol and related products are historically high now, both in US and by and large, all across the world. And it is primarily because of the kind of policies US has followed vis-a-vis Russia, banning US and its allies, basically, banning the Russian exports, trying to kind of isolate Russia, which has led to, and Russia is not alone. The US sanction regimes against Iran, U.S. sanction regimes against Venezuela and the war which kind of created a situation where Libya has been put out of the international market, oil market. All the major producers are out of the market for some reason or the other, and all of those are related to, the reasons are related to, directly or indirectly, with the United States. So of course, the onus for this particular crisis globally is with the United States. Also, within the United States, there are enough strategic reserves, there are enough capabilities of the US companies to produce petroleum and other products, which they are not doing because there is an emphasis on profit maximization. Hence, these scenarios are known by now. When Biden was trying to persuade his own domestic companies in US to produce more, they refused to do it.
Right.
So in that particular context, when US is primarily responsible for the crisis globally, and also the government has failed to persuade their own domestic producers to raise the production, it is very difficult to publicly claim that the visit to Saudi Arabia is primarily to persuade Saudis to produce more. That will lead to loss of whatever little credibility the Biden administration has at this moment, particularly in this context. And that is the reason that they are not talking about it, knowing very well that Saudi Arabia has already said that they are not going to increase the production, and rest of the OPEC members are not also willing to increase the production. They want the prices to be high because they are the producers, because that basically helps them recover from the COVID recession and other economic problems. The higher the price, they will be able to deal with their own economic situations much better. So given this particular condition, Biden does not want to own the responsibility that he is going to visit Saudi Arabia primarily to ask Saudis to increase the production, because it is knowing that it is going to fail anyway.
All right, Abdul, thanks a lot for that update. Brazil's election watchdog has warned of severe unrest in the run-up to presidential polls in October. He has said the situation could be worse than in the United States on 6 January 2021, when former President Donald Trump's supporters had violently laid siege to Capitol Hill. Of late, Bolsonaro has trailed behind rival Luiz Inácio da Silva. The worrying aspect is some military officials have been echoing Bolsonaro's concerns about the electoral system. We'll go to Prashant from People's Dispatch about this development. Prashant, the warning comes from a very senior electoral officer. How do we understand this?
Right, Pragya, we need to see this in the context of months of pronouncements by Bolsonaro and his allies. So there is there's been a concerted effort by him to sort of cast doubt on the electoral process in Brazil. And a lot of that has centered around the fact that he keeps saying that the electoral voting machines, which are used in Brazil for tabulation, like in many countries across the world, are suspects. According to him, they're suspect. And so he's been sort of trying to return to a paper-based system, which he says can be verified more easily, and etc., etc. Now, this really follows the playbook of a lot of people who want to keep casting doubts on the electoral process with no evidence at all. And this this is more alarming because of the fact that he is where he is. He's the president of Brazil. Jair Bolsonaro is the president of Brazil. And despite there being no evidence of anything of this sort, there's been this concerted attempt to keep raising doubts about it. He tells his supporters, his allies in various institutions keep flagging this issue. He sort of recently he made a pronouncement where he said that he would hand over power peacefully, but if there was no fraud. Now but if there was no fraud is a very, very important aspect, because it almost mirrors entirely what Donald Trump said during, in the months preceding the election in the US in 2020 as well. And once the election happened, he raised all kinds of, allegations which had there was no substantial proof for any of that. Many of these allegations were time and again rebutted by people in all levels of power, but nonetheless Donald Trump persisted. And we need to sort of see this in the context of this right-wing ecosystem that has been built around Bolsonaro. It was there in the 2018 election as well. And Brasil de Fato, for instance, has reported how in Telegram, in maybe in the subterranean levels of Telegram, so to speak. There's a very vibrant right-wing ecosystem which thrives on spreading this kind of information. That the electoral process is hacked, the machines are all cannot be trusted, everything is a conspiracy to sort of make sure Bolsonaro does not return to power. So there's this massive misinformation machine almost that's working, influencing people at a very vast scale. Social media platforms like Telegram, YouTube being used considerably for this. So what Bolsonaro and his allies have been doing at the very top is pretty much to sort of keep spreading this doubt. And we even have this rare instance of the US apparently advising him, considering, which is ironic considering the US record of interfering in elections. But apparently even the US, the CIA informed him that he should stick to the sanctity of elections or whatever it is. But all this goes to show that we are entering a very difficult couple of months as far as Brazil is concerned. The right wing, I think, has sensed that they are on the back foot. We'll talk about that later. But there's a sense they're on the back foot. They really don't have anything much to offer the people. There is this vast record of bad governance in various aspects. And so the alternative to all this is to sort of create this sense of fear that things are kind of something is secretly wrong. There's a conspiracy, etc. And this is despite the fact that there are multiple reports that various institutions in Brazil are going the extra mile. Some may even say unnecessarily, to sort of engage all sections to make sure that everyone is aware of the institutions are safe. We know that the electoral authority is in fact engaging with the military to sort of make sure that they do not raise this kind of obstacles as well. And the military is apparently also technically they have promised neutrality and respect the law and all that. But all this is actually it's not a really good sign for a country like Brazil, which has already faced a military dictatorship in the past. Bolsonaro, as we know, is a fan of that military dictatorship. So important times for democracy in Brazil.
Right. Prashant, could this also have something to do with the polls that show that Bolsonaro is not doing well at all? Absolutely.
So like I said, Bolsonaro does not have a really good governance record at all, so to speak. I mean, there's a pandemic was a horrible, it is a complete mess the way he handled the pandemic. The environmental disaster has been quite significant. We know that working people are really suffering in terms of incomes, in terms of costs. There have been strikes and struggles across the country. And amid all this, we have Lula da Silva returning back to contest in the elections. And I think the recent polls show, for instance, that, in the first round, for instance, two recent polls that came show Lula anywhere between 43 to 46%. And Bolsonaro is maybe 30 to 31%. So that's the extent of difference that's there. And even if there is a second round, these polls show Lula, winning by maybe around 20% margin, 20-point margin, so to speak, and which is a considerable, margin. So this is probably also what is causing these sections around Bolsonaro and Bolsonaro himself to raise these kind of slogans. And Lula has also sort of tried to construct a kind of coalition, not only of his traditional supporters, not only of the left, but also appealing to centrists and moderates across the spectrum. The plans he's released talk about, reducing damage to the ecology. They talk about, removing some of the problematic aspects of various labor laws that have passed. So he's also running a campaign which seeks to appeal to white sections. And in between this, we have Bolsonaro, who really has nothing much to, he's sort of trying to expand some of the welfare measures that were willy-nilly put in place because the demand was too great for them. And he's trying to claim that. But other than that, he does not seem to have really constructive policies as far as the people are concerned. So this is why that margin has stayed, and this margin has been stayed for months. It's not a sudden margin. Even the fluctuations that are there have been minor, maybe 1 point, 2 point, etc. And right. As October comes, what we're going to see is that there's going to be, of course, more details about Lula's campaign that come up, appeals to more sections of the population. So like I said, we really have the Bolsonaro and the right wing on the defensive. No other right wing candidate really also even close anywhere in the picture. So what we have is Bolsonaro and his system sort of, who are already extremely unpopular, trying to vitiate the atmosphere with all these kind of claims. And for Brazil, which is of course the largest country in Latin America, very key election, not only for Brazil itself, but also for the region, considering the recent dynamics that we've seen, the pink tide, so to speak, that we've seen across the continent. So keeping all this in mind, this is going to be a very important election for the whole region. And Brazil's institutions, Brazil's democracy, Brazil's people for that matter, because ultimately it boils down to the people, they will have a huge responsibility in making sure that the mandate of democracy is respected, that the election takes place properly, and that unnecessary doubts are not thrown on what are actually working institutions which have worked in the past, and just to vitiate the atmosphere and create social strife. Right, Prashant, and that should also explain why the election watchdog has issued the warning right now.
A Swiss court has acquitted former FIFA chief Joseph Blatter and former UEFA chief Michel Platini of fraud and bribery charges. On 8 June, hearings began at a Switzerland court into numerous charges against the two. Platini was charged with accepting illegal payments of over $2 million from Blatter in 2011. Platini was also charged with submitting a fictitious invoice to FIFA. They were at the top of the game until the charges were leveled and an investigation began. Earlier, we spoke to Leslie Xavier from NewsClick and we got more details from him. So, Leslie, what were the charges against the two people?
This specific case, which was the criminal proceedings that was happening in the Swiss court, so this dates back quite a while back. So Platini had a consultant role about the time Blatter took charge as the head of FIFA, as a FIFA president. That was in '98, and from '98 to 2002, he acted as a consultant with FIFA. So his contract, as per FIFA records, was for 300,000 per annum, and that finished. And after that, 2011, the current case, the reason for current case, 2 million Swiss francs were transferred to Platini. The payment was made from FIFA funds. So that is where the investigations began, and it more or less coincided with the. It coincided with the, more or less is a wrong usage here. It coincided with the FIFA elections where Blatter was standing for re-election, and Platini was at the helm of European football organization, UEFA, and so he had sway of votes because a lot of countries were under him, supporting him. So whoever he points at, they would have voted. So that was the underlying conspiracy that was playing about, and so that's what the red flag came up, that why this payment now. And so Blatter's and Platini's justification at the court also, and before that as well, was that this was a gentleman's agreement between us, that at that point FIFA didn't have the funding to fully pay Blatter's charges, which was 1 million francs, and so it was decided that at a later stage that payment would be made. But we are talking about high profile sport, international sport, and a sport like football, where footballers themselves, and these two are former footballers, professional footballers as well. So any form of money deal is under contract, very clear. And also these organizations, it's not like you are running your own family-owned business. It's an accountable organization as such. So that baffles me completely as to why this argument was even valid and put forth. But apparently the court agrees to that, and whatever other justifications, because the news is fresh, so the analysis of the judgment is yet to take place. So I can just give you that initial comment as to what must have prompted the court to decide against it. But over the course of the next 2-3 days, I guess the judgment would be analyzed, and we will see how these two got acquitted in this specific case.
Right, but is the acquittal in any case a surprise, and what are the implications of this?
It is a surprise because when you look at court and court proceedings, we would expect that, and with the kind of payment, the large amount, some payment that was made, justification should be something which is objective and something valid on paper.
Right.
And so that's why I said let's wait for the judgment to come up and then come out, and let's analyze and then figure out exactly whether this is a surprise or not a surprise or whatever. But at the same time, I would like to say that this is not the only case that is being, against corruption charges that has been against Blatter. So Blatter's exit from FIFA as president in 2015 was not triggered by this corruption scandal alone. There have been a host of cases. The FIFA Ethics Committee had investigated Blatter on various cases, including some case related to funds related to FIFA Museum project, payment of bonuses to FIFA officials, and also the awarding of the World Cup to specific countries, the voting process that happens also. It has always been shady in FIFA. So that has always been under the scanner, and for some reason Blatter had evaded being caught in that mess. But like I pointed out, the few specific cases, there has been a host of cases under him, and one would say, again I'm quoting some senior journalists who had pursued these cases, that the period of Blatter saw unprecedented financial growth for FIFA. As far as their flagship event, the FIFA World Cup, they started making tremendous amount of money Before that, they were breaking even, they were in loss, things like that. But from the 90s onwards, it has grown substantially. So, having said that, having the financial growth that FIFA has enjoyed under his tenure, but also it has also fallen into disrepute as far as corruption and corrupt practices are concerned, and also sticking on to power. That is been the primary game of all officials, and and it trickles down to the basic national level as well. Even countries like India, if you look at it, when the officials come into power, they try to stick on to the power using every hook and crook, and then and so so FIFA officials entertain that because voting rights, they vote for them when the time is up. So it's that structurally FIFA's that corruption that also heightened during Blatter's tenure. So
all right. So the entirely exculpatory remarks they're making about this acquittal.
Let's not celebrate that, because there are many more things to it, and this is a specific case as such. And like I said, let's wait for the judgment fully and see what was the reason why they were acquitted.
Got it. Thanks a lot for that update. And that's all we have for today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. Please come back to us tomorrow. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And for more updates and analysis from around the world, visit peoplesdispatch.org.